The Meridian Gallery buzzed with the kind of understated energy that only came with serious money and serious art. Cassidy Thorne positioned herself near the entrance, her trained eyes scanning the crowd of well-dressed patrons as they admired abstract paintings that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. She looked like she belonged in this world of champagne flutes and designer gowns, her black suit tailored perfectly, her auburn hair swept back in a professional chignon. But beneath the polished exterior, every instinct she possessed remained on high alert. 3 years out of the Navy, and she still couldn't shake the hypervigilance. Even here, surrounded by Los Angeles elite discussing art investments and charity galas, her mind automatically cataloged exit routes, identified potential weapons, assessed threat levels of every person who walked through the door. Most security consultants protected corporate executives or tech billionaires. Cassidy specialized in art galleries and museums, places where priceless objects drew both legitimate admirers and very dangerous thieves. Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Sometimes that feeling isn't paranoia, it's survival instinct. I'm curious what city you're watching from tonight. Let me know in the comments. She adjusted her position to maintain visual coverage of both entrances while keeping the main exhibition wall in her peripheral vision. The centerpiece tonight was a Monet water lily painting, valued at $12 million and currently surrounded by admirers who had no idea how many different ways someone could steal it. Cassidy knew at least 17 methods off the top of her head. Her SEAL training hadn't exactly covered art theft, but tactical thinking applied to any high-value target scenario. The gallery owner, Margaret Whitmore, approached with her practiced smile firmly in place. "Mrs. Whitmore, darling of the LA art scene, can I introduce you to Vincent Ashworth from the Times?" she said, gesturing to a distinguished man with silver hair and an expensive camera. Cassidy nodded politely, maintaining her professional demeanor while her attention split between the conversation and movement patterns throughout the gallery. Something felt wrong tonight. Not obvious, not immediate, but wrong nonetheless. 3 men had arrived separately over the past hour, each well-dressed and carrying appropriate gallery credentials, each spending exactly the right amount of time at each painting. But Cassidy noticed things others didn't. The way they positioned themselves to maintain visual contact with each other. How their eyes lingered on security cameras and staff positions rather than artwork. The subtle bulges in their jacket lines that suggested concealed weapons. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with familiar premonition focus. She'd felt this same electric anticipation countless times before raids in Afghanistan. That moment when training took over and the world narrowed to immediate tactical concerns. These weren't art lovers. They were professionals, and they were here for something specific. Near the back corner, a 4th figure caught her attention. Dante Moretti moved through the crowd with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he owned everything he looked at. Cassidy recognized him from newspaper photos, legitimate businessman with rumored connections to less legitimate enterprises. He studied each painting with genuine interest, occasionally nodding to acquaintances, completely at ease in this environment. Unlike the 3 suspicious men, Moretti belonged here. What troubled her was how often his dark eyes found her across the room. Not the predatory assessment she'd grown used to from men who saw her as a challenge to conquer, but something more calculating. Professional evaluation. Like he was measuring her capabilities, testing her awareness level. When their gazes met, he didn't look away with embarrassment or offer a flirtatious smile. He simply observed, cataloged, filed away whatever conclusions he drew. The first suspicious man moved toward the Monet. Cassidy tracked his approach while maintaining casual conversation with Mrs. Whitmore about insurance protocols. Standard security would focus on protecting the painting itself, but Cassidy's military training taught her to think systematically. If she wanted to steal something from this gallery, she wouldn't walk out the front door carrying a $12 million painting. She'd create chaos, confusion, multiple distractions while the real objective happened elsewhere. Her earpiece crackled softly. "Perimeter team, this is Control," she murmured, activating her throat mic. The gallery's standard security consisted of 4 guards stationed at strategic points throughout the building, plus external surveillance. Professional, but not military grade. If these men were what she suspected, the regular security wouldn't be sufficient. Movement near the service entrance drew her attention. A fifth man, this one carrying what appeared to be catering equipment, but moving with the same controlled precision as the others. Cassidy's tactical assessment shifted from suspicious to certain. Whatever was about to happen, it would happen soon. She excused herself from Mrs. Whitmore and began a casual circuit of the gallery, positioning herself to respond to multiple threat vectors. Her breathing slowed automatically, muscle memory from thousands of hours of combat training taking control. 3 years of civilian life hadn't dulled her edge, only taught her to hide it better. Dante Moretti intercepted her path near the sculpture display. "Enjoying the exhibition, Ms. Thorne," he said, his voice carrying just enough accent to suggest European origins. She paused, noting he knew her name despite never being introduced. That level of preparation suggested either extensive research or excellent intelligence networks. "The art is magnificent," she replied, maintaining professional politeness while her peripheral vision tracked the suspicious men's positions. "But I'm more interested in the security arrangements tonight." Something flickered in his dark eyes, recognition or perhaps approval. "A woman after my own heart," he murmured. "Security is always the most fascinating aspect of any valuable collection." Before she could respond, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the gallery in red shadows as confused murmurs rose from the crowd. Cassidy's training overrode everything else. She dropped into a combat crouch, hand moving instinctively toward where her sidearm would have been if she'd been wearing full tactical gear. Civilian security consultant position meant concealed carry only, but her Glock remained accessible in its shoulder holster. "Ladies and gentlemen, stay calm and remain where you are," a voice boomed through the darkness. Armed figures materialized from various positions throughout the gallery, weapons visible in the emergency lighting. "This is a robbery. Comply with our instructions, and no one will be harmed." Cassidy counted 5 armed men, exactly as she'd identified earlier. Professional gear, coordinated timing, military-style precision. These weren't amateur thieves hoping to grab a painting and run. This was a sophisticated operation targeting something specific, using the art exhibition as cover. Mrs. Whitmore screamed. Several patrons dropped to the floor instinctively, while others stood frozen in shock. The lead gunman gestured toward the crowd with his assault rifle, herding them into a tight group near the center of the gallery. Standard hostage control protocol, designed to maintain maximum leverage while minimizing variables. "Everyone on the ground, hands visible, no sudden movements," the leader commanded. "We're here for a specific item. Cooperate, and you'll all go home to your families tonight." Cassidy remained crouched behind a marble sculpture, invisible in the red shadows, her mind automatically shifting to tactical assessment mode. 5 armed professionals with military training, probably ex-military themselves based on their movement patterns and weapon handling. They'd clearly studied the gallery layout and security protocols extensively. Most concerning, they seemed completely confident in their ability to complete their mission and escape. She noticed Dante Moretti hadn't moved to join the hostages. Instead, he'd positioned himself behind a pillar near the main entrance, his own weapon now visible in his hand. Not a frightened civilian after all, but someone prepared for exactly this type of situation. Their eyes met across the darkened gallery, and he nodded slightly, acknowledging her tactical position. The leader approached the Monet painting while 2 gunmen maintained overwatch on the hostages. The 4th man moved toward the gallery office where the safe would be located. The 5th positioned himself near the service entrance, presumably to facilitate their escape route. Standard robbery protocol would be to wait for police response and negotiate from a position of strength. But Cassidy's SEAL training had taught her that hostage situations deteriorated rapidly once they became static. These men were professionals, but they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They'd assumed everyone in the gallery tonight was a civilian. Cassidy slipped off her heels and began moving through the shadows toward the nearest gunman. Her heartbeat remained steady, breathing controlled, muscle memory taking over completely. 3 years of civilian life vanished as if they'd never existed. She was a weapon again, and these men had just threatened innocent people under her protection. Time to remind them why Navy SEALs were the most dangerous predators in any environment. "Everyone down. Now," the lead gunman barked, his assault rifle sweeping across the crowd of terrified gallery patrons. Cassidy watched from her concealed position as elegantly dressed men and women dropped to their knees on the polished marble floor, designer gowns and expensive suits forgotten in the face of immediate terror. Mrs. Whitmore sobbed quietly, her face pale in the emergency lighting as she clutched her pearls like a lifeline. The gunman moved with practiced efficiency, herding the hostages into a tight cluster near the center of the gallery while maintaining clear fields of fire. Professional execution, Cassidy noted grimly. These weren't desperate amateurs who might panic and start shooting randomly. They were experienced operators following a predetermined plan, which made them infinitely more dangerous. She counted 17 civilians now huddled together on the floor, their lives hanging in the balance while the robbery team secured the perimeter. The second gunman positioned himself with overwatch on the hostages, his weapon trained on the group with casual indifference that chilled her blood. To him, these were simply assets to be managed, not human beings with families and dreams and futures. 3 years of civilian life had taught Cassidy to appreciate the normalcy she'd never known during her military service. Gallery openings, coffee shops, grocery stores where the biggest threat was running out of her favorite brand of pasta. She'd grown to love the peaceful predictability of a world where violence wasn't the default solution to every problem. But watching innocent people terrorized by armed predators brought every combat instinct roaring back to life. The third gunman approached an elderly man who'd been admiring the Monet when the lights went out. Distinguished silver hair, expensive watch, probably someone's grandfather who'd come to enjoy beautiful art on a Friday evening. The gunman grabbed him by his suit jacket and hauled him to his feet, pressing the barrel of his pistol against the man's temple. "This is what happens when people don't follow instructions," the gunman announced to the terrified crowd. "Anyone tries to be a hero, anyone makes a sound, this old man dies first. Then we start working our way through the rest of you until you learn to behave." The elderly man trembled but remained silent, his eyes wide with terror as the cold metal pressed against his skull. Mrs. Whitmore's sobs grew louder until another patron shushed her desperately, understanding that any noise might trigger the execution of an innocent man. Something primal and furious ignited in Cassidy's chest. She joined the Navy to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, had spent 8 years learning to eliminate threats against innocent civilians. 3 years of peaceful retirement evaporated as if they'd never existed. These predators had made a fatal miscalculation by bringing violence into her presence. Her breathing slowed automatically, heartbeat settling into the steady rhythm that preceded lethal action. Every SEAL learned to control their physiology under stress, to transform terror and rage into cold precision. The trembling woman in the designer dress disappeared, replaced by the warrior she'd trained her entire adult life to become. The nearest gunman stood 12 feet away, positioned to guard the service entrance while maintaining visual contact with his team. He held his weapon casually, attention split between the hostages and radio communications with someone outside. Sloppy. Professional criminals should never assume their environment was completely secure. Cassidy slipped her heels off completely and placed them silently on the floor. Barefoot, she could move without sound across the marble, using shadows and sculptures for concealment. The emergency lighting created perfect conditions for stealth approach, bright enough to navigate, but dark enough to mask movement from someone who understood how to exploit ambient illumination. She drew her Glock from its concealed holster, checking the chamber automatically before beginning her approach. 15 rounds, 1 in the chamber. More than enough to neutralize 5 targets if she maintained proper fire discipline and tactical positioning. But gunfire in a crowded space with hostages would create chaos that might get innocent people killed. Better to take them quietly when possible. The service entrance guard never saw her coming. Cassidy approached from his blind spot, using a marble pillar for concealment until she was within arm's reach. Her left hand snaked around his throat while her right hand controlled his weapon, preventing him from bringing it to bear or alerting his team. The blood choke cut off circulation to his brain within seconds, and he slumped unconscious in her arms. She lowered him silently to the floor and secured his assault rifle, quickly checking his equipment for additional magazines and communications gear. Military-grade radio system, professional body armor, high-end weapons. These men had serious financial backing and extensive tactical preparation. Whatever they were really here for, it wasn't just art theft. The second gunman maintained overwatch from across the gallery. His attention focused on the hostages while the team leader examined the Monet painting. Cassidy used the sculpture displays for concealment, moving from shadow to shadow until she had a clear approach vector. This one would be trickier. He stood in the open with good sight lines, alert and professional. But every operator had weaknesses, and Cassidy had learned to exploit them all. She picked up a small piece of marble that had chipped off during the initial chaos, hefting it to judge weight and trajectory. A simple distraction, but effective when properly executed. The stone sailed across the gallery and struck a metal sculpture near the opposite wall, creating a sharp ringing sound that immediately drew the gunman's attention. He swung toward the noise, weapon raised, giving Cassidy the opening she needed. She closed the distance in 3 silent strides, her combat knife finding the nerve cluster in his neck that would drop him instantly, without permanent injury. He collapsed unconscious before his brain could process the attack. 2 down, 3 to go. But now she faced a more complex tactical situation. The team leader held position near the Monet while the 4th gunman worked on something in the gallery office. The 5th man maintained his grip on the elderly hostage, using him as a human shield while scanning for threats. Standard protocol would be to take out the immediate threat to civilian lives first, but that meant engaging the most tactically difficult target. Cassidy found herself thinking about the families these hostages would return to tonight. Children waiting for parents, spouses preparing late dinners, grandchildren who expected bedtime stories. 3 years of civilian life had taught her to see people as individuals rather than tactical assets. It made her more protective, not less dangerous. She positioned herself for a clear shot on the gunman holding the elderly man. 15 yards, moving target, innocent civilian in close proximity. Difficult, but manageable for someone with her training. Her finger found the trigger as she controlled her breathing, waiting for the perfect moment when the gunman's position would minimize risk to the hostage. The shot took him center mass, dropping him instantly while the elderly man stumbled forward into the arms of other hostages. The sound echoed through the gallery like thunder, shattering the tense silence and triggering immediate chaos. The team leader spun toward her position, his weapon tracking for targets while the office gunman emerged at the sound of gunfire. 2 armed professionals, both now aware they were under attack, both moving to eliminate the threat she represented. But Cassidy had spent 8 years learning to fight multiple opponents in close quarters. She rolled behind a marble sculpture as automatic weapons fire chewed through the space where she'd been standing, showering her with stone fragments and dust. The gunman advanced on her position with tactical precision, attempting to flank her hiding spot while maintaining mutual support. They'd forgotten about Dante Moretti. The crime boss emerged from his concealed position near the main entrance, his own weapon speaking with deadly accuracy. The office gunman dropped immediately while the team leader found himself caught between 2 threats, his tactical advantage evaporating in seconds. Cassidy used the distraction to advance on the remaining gunman, her movements fluid and predatory as she closed the distance. He turned toward her just as her knife found his throat, ending the threat permanently and decisively. Silence fell over the gallery like a blanket, broken only by the quiet sobs of terrified civilians and the distant wail of approaching sirens. 5 armed professionals lay unconscious or dead on the marble floor, their sophisticated robbery operation destroyed by 2 people they'd never seen coming. Dante Moretti approached through the emergency lighting, his weapon lowered but ready, dark eyes assessing the tactical situation with obvious professional appreciation. He moved like a man comfortable with violence, someone who'd been in similar situations many times before. "Impressive work," he said quietly, his accented voice carrying genuine admiration. Most security consultants would have waited for police response. Cassidy holstered her Glock and checked on the elderly hostage, her hands gentle as she examined him for injuries despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Most security consultants aren't former Navy SEALs," she replied, meeting Dante's calculating gaze across the gallery. Something shifted in his expression, recognition mixed with satisfaction and perhaps inevitability. He smiled, but it wasn't the polite social expression she'd seen earlier. This was the smile of a predator who'd just found exactly what he'd been hunting for. "I've been waiting for you," he murmured, and something in his tone suggested this meeting had never been coincidental at all. The LAPD tactical response team swept through the gallery like a coordinated storm, their movements precise and professional as they secured the scene and began processing what would undoubtedly become one of the year's most high-profile criminal cases. Detective Sarah Chun approached Cassidy with the kind of measured respect that police officers reserved for civilians who'd just accomplished something extraordinary and potentially problematic. "Ms. Thorne, I'm Detective Chun, LAPD. I understand you were instrumental in neutralizing the robbery team," she said, her notebook already open and pen poised. "I'll need a complete statement about tonight's events, starting from when you first noticed suspicious activity." Cassidy found herself mentally editing her account even as she spoke, translating 8 years of classified military experience into language that would satisfy police requirements without revealing operational details she wasn't authorized to discuss. She described her security consultant role, her tactical assessment of the suspicious individuals, and her decision to intervene when civilian lives were threatened. The detective listened with professional attention, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timeline and positioning. But even as she provided her statement, Cassidy remained hyper-aware of Dante Moretti's presence across the gallery. He stood near the main entrance, speaking with federal agents who'd arrived shortly after the local police, his conversation conducted in the low tones of someone accustomed to dealing with law enforcement on a regular basis. She caught fragments of his explanation, his accent more pronounced when he spoke rapidly, his body language projecting the kind of calm authority that suggested this wasn't his first encounter with violent crime. Every few minutes their eyes would meet across the crowded space, and she'd feel that same electric assessment she'd noticed earlier in the evening. But now it carried additional weight, the recognition of shared lethality and mutual professional respect. He'd moved through the gunfight with the fluid precision of someone extensively trained in close-quarters combat, his weapon handling and tactical positioning revealing skills that went far beyond civilian self-defense courses. "Your military background certainly served you well tonight," Detective Chin observed, closing her notebook after 40 minutes of detailed questioning. "Though I have to say, most veterans don't maintain that level of operational readiness 3 years after discharge." Cassidy smiled politely, neither confirming nor denying the assessment. "Old habits, Detective. Some skills you never really lose." The detective handed her a business card and advised her to expect follow-up contact from federal investigators, given the sophisticated nature of the robbery attempt and the military-grade equipment the criminals had carried. "Standard procedure for cases involving organized crime and professional criminal enterprises," she explained. As the detective moved away to interview other witnesses, Cassidy found herself alone for the first time since the shooting began. The adrenaline was finally starting to fade, leaving behind the familiar hollow exhaustion that always followed combat. 3 years of civilian life had softened her tolerance for the chemical crash that came after lethal encounters. Dante approached while she stood near the damaged sculpture display, his footsteps silent on the marble floor despite his expensive leather shoes. Up close, she could see details she'd missed during their earlier brief interactions. The faint scar along his left temple that spoke of past violence. The way his dark eyes constantly tracked movement around them even during casual conversation. The subtle bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his perfectly tailored jacket. "Difficult evening," he said, his voice carrying genuine sympathy beneath the polite concern. "Though I suspect you've experienced worse." Cassidy studied his face, noting the intelligence behind his careful words and the predatory stillness that marked him as dangerous despite his civilized appearance. "A few times," she replied carefully. "You handled yourself well for a civilian." Something flickered in his dark eyes, amusement perhaps, or recognition of her tactical assessment. "Civilian is an interesting choice of words, Miss Thorne. Though I suppose we're all civilians here, technically speaking." The qualification hung between them like a challenge, an acknowledgement of shared secrets and hidden capabilities. Cassidy found herself genuinely curious about this man who moved through violence with such practiced ease while maintaining the facade of legitimate businessman. "I've been waiting for you," he said quietly, his tone shifting to something more serious and purposeful. "Not you specifically, but someone with your particular combination of skills and integrity. Someone capable of handling situations that require more than conventional security measures. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with professional interest. 3 years of corporate security consulting had paid the bills, but left her feeling restless and underutilized. Gallery openings and museum exhibitions, while culturally enriching, didn't provide the sense of purpose that had driven her through 8 years of military service. What kind of situations? She asked, keeping her voice neutral despite her growing curiosity. Dante glanced around the gallery, confirming they weren't being overheard by the various law enforcement personnel still processing the scene. The kind that involved protecting innocent people from very dangerous individuals. The kind where conventional law enforcement is either unwilling or unable to act effectively. The kind that requires someone with your specific training and moral compass. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, expensive heavy stock with minimal text. Just his name, phone number, and a simple logo she didn't recognize. No company name, no title, no address. The kind of card that suggested services too specialized or sensitive for conventional advertising. I run a private security firm, he explained, noting her examination of the card. We handle protective details for high-risk clients, threat assessment and elimination, personnel recovery from hostile situations. Legitimate work, though not always through entirely legal channels. The people we protect often can't rely on official resources for various reasons. Cassidy turned the card over in her fingers, feeling the quality of the paper while processing the implications of his offer. Mercenary work, essentially, though he'd been careful not to use that specific term. The gray area where private military contractors operated, serving clients who needed capabilities beyond what traditional security firms could provide. Why me? She asked. There are plenty of former special operations personnel in Los Angeles looking for private sector work. Because most of them are either too damaged to work with civilians or too eager to use violence as the primary solution to every problem. Dante replied with surprising candor. Tonight you showed perfect fire discipline, minimal necessary force, and genuine concern for innocent lives. You neutralized threats without creating additional casualties or unnecessary collateral damage. That combination of skills and restraint is extremely rare. She found herself studying his face as he spoke, noting the sincerity in his voice and the careful intelligence behind his words. This wasn't a recruitment pitch based on money or excitement. He was offering her something she'd been missing without realizing it, the opportunity to use her skills for meaningful purpose while protecting people who needed protection. The federal agents were finishing their preliminary interviews and beginning to release witnesses. Mrs. Whitmore approached with tears of gratitude, thanking Cassidy repeatedly for saving their lives and expressing her intention to personally ensure that the gallery's insurance company understood exactly who deserved credit for preventing a catastrophic theft. As the crowd began to thin, Dante moved closer, his presence both comforting and slightly overwhelming. She found herself hyper-aware of his physical proximity, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with gunpowder residue, the controlled strength evident in his movements. 3 years of civilian dating had introduced her to plenty of attractive, successful men, but none who radiated the kind of dangerous competence that called to something primal in her nature. I know this is sudden, he said quietly, his dark eyes serious and focused entirely on her face. I know you don't know me well enough to trust my motivations or my organization's legitimacy, but I've spent months looking for someone with your capabilities, and tonight confirmed everything I hoped to find. The card felt warm in her palm, substantial and somehow significant beyond its simple design. She realized that her civilian life, comfortable and safe as it had become, felt suddenly incomplete when compared to the possibility of meaningful mission work. Gallery security and corporate consulting had never felt like her true calling, merely a way to survive while figuring out what came next. I'll consider your offer, she said finally, meeting his intense gaze with her own steady evaluation. But I'll need more details about your organization, your clients, and exactly what kind of situations you're describing. His smile was genuine this time, not the polite social expression or predatory satisfaction she'd seen earlier, but something warmer and more personal. Of course, I would expect nothing less from someone with your background and intelligence. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. When you're ready for those details, call the number on the card. But don't wait too long, Miss Thorne. The world has plenty of people who need protecting, and very few who are capable of actually doing it. As he turned to leave, pausing to speak briefly with the federal agents before walking toward the gallery exit, Cassidy found herself watching his movements with professional appreciation and something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with tactical assessment and everything to do with the way her pulse quickened when he looked at her like she was exactly what he'd been searching for. 3 days after the gallery incident, Cassidy found herself standing outside a gleaming downtown high-rise, Dante's business card still warm in her palm from the nervous energy she'd been carrying since their encounter. She'd spent those 3 days researching everything she could find about Dante Moretti, discovering a carefully constructed public persona of legitimate business interests and charitable foundations that revealed absolutely nothing about his true operations. The penthouse elevator required a special key card that Dante had personally delivered to her apartment the previous evening, arriving unannounced with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he'd been monitoring her decision-making process. Their brief conversation at her doorstep had been professionally polite, but she'd felt the electric tension that seemed to spark whenever they occupied the same space. The elevator opened directly into his office, revealing a space that managed to be both elegant and subtly threatening. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of Los Angeles stretching toward the Pacific, while the furniture combined modern sophistication with what appeared to be bulletproof glass and reinforced steel construction. Art pieces that looked museum quality adorned the walls, but Cassidy's trained eye noticed the strategic placement of security cameras and what were probably concealed weapon lockers. Dante stood behind a massive desk reviewing what appeared to be architectural blueprints, his concentration absolute until the elevator chimed her arrival. He looked up with genuine pleasure, his dark eyes warming as they took in her appearance. She'd chosen business attire that projected professional competence while allowing for concealed carry, a balance that had become second nature during her corporate consulting work. "Miss Thorne, thank you for coming," he said, moving around the desk with that fluid grace she'd noticed at the gallery. "I wasn't entirely certain you would accept my invitation." Cassidy found herself studying his face as he approached, noting the signs of fatigue around his eyes and the tension in his shoulders that suggested he'd been dealing with significant stress since their last meeting. "Professional curiosity," she replied, though she knew it was more than that. "Your offer raises interesting questions about the nature of your organization and the services you provide." He gestured toward a seating area near the windows, 2 leather chairs positioned to provide both privacy and tactical advantage. She noticed he'd arranged them so both occupants could monitor the elevator and office entrances, a consideration that spoke to his understanding of how people like her thought about spatial positioning. "Coffee, wine, something stronger," he offered as they settled into the chairs. "I have excellent bourbon if you're interested, or Italian espresso that my mother would consider acceptable." The mention of his mother caught her attention, a brief glimpse of personal history beneath his carefully controlled professional facade. "Coffee would be perfect," she said, watching as he moved to a sophisticated machine that looked like it belonged in a high-end restaurant. As he prepared their drinks, she used the opportunity to conduct a more thorough assessment of the office space. Multiple exit routes, communications equipment that went far beyond standard business needs, and security measures that suggested either extreme paranoia or legitimate threats requiring such precautions. The man was clearly operating at a level of risk that demanded military-grade protective protocols. "You've been researching me," he said without turning around, his tone carrying amusement rather than accusation. "I would have been disappointed if you hadn't. Due diligence is essential when considering any professional relationship, particularly one involving potential violence." She accepted the coffee, noting the quality of both the blend and the preparation. "Your public profile is impressively thorough and completely uninformative," she observed. "Legitimate business interests, charitable foundations, no criminal record, no obvious connections to illegal enterprises. Either you're exactly what you appear to be, or you're extremely good at maintaining operational security." Dante settled into the chair across from her, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the faint scar she'd noticed at the gallery. Both, actually. My legitimate businesses are genuinely profitable and legal, but they also provide cover and resources for activities that fall into grayer areas of the law. He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious and focused. I'm going to tell you something that could be extremely dangerous for both of us if it reaches the wrong people. Federal Judge Patricia Hawthorne was kidnapped 4 days ago from her home in Beverly Hills. The FBI believes she's being held by a Russian criminal organization that wants to force her to dismiss charges against their leadership. Cassidy felt her pulse quicken, recognizing the shift from theoretical discussion to active operational briefing. Judge Hawthorne, she said, recalling news reports she'd seen. The media said she was taking a temporary leave of absence for health reasons. Official cover story to prevent panic and avoid compromising ongoing rescue efforts, Dante confirmed. But those efforts have been unsuccessful so far. The kidnappers have her in a fortified compound in the San Gabriel Mountains, heavy security, professional guards, sophisticated surveillance systems. Standard law enforcement approaches have failed. She found herself leaning forward, drawn into the tactical challenge despite her reservations about his organization's legality. What makes you think a private operation would succeed where federal resources have failed? She asked. Because federal operations require official authorization, legal justification, and adherence to protocols that prioritize political considerations over mission effectiveness, he replied with obvious frustration. My people can move without those constraints, use methods that law enforcement can't officially sanction, take risks that bureaucrats won't authorize. The logic was sound, even if the implications were troubling. Cassidy had experienced similar frustrations during her military service, watching politics and legal restrictions hamper operations that could have saved lives. But crossing the line from legal to illegal, even for worthy causes, represented a fundamental moral boundary she'd never crossed. Why do you care about one federal judge? She asked, studying his face for the emotional truth beneath his professional explanation. There are plenty of people who disappear without generating this level of personal investment. Something shifted in Dante's expression, vulnerability replacing calculated assessment. Because Patricia Hawthorne isn't just any federal judge. She's the guardian of my goddaughter, Sophia, 8 years old, currently staying with friends because her legal guardian has vanished, and she doesn't understand why the woman who reads her bedtime stories every night isn't coming home. The revelation hit Cassidy like a physical blow, reframing everything about his motivations and the urgency driving his recruitment efforts. This wasn't about business or criminal enterprises or even justice in the abstract. This was about a little girl who needed her guardian back, and a man who would do absolutely anything to make that happen. She tried to imagine being 8 years old and having someone she loved simply disappear without explanation. The terror, the confusion, the desperate hope that somehow everything would return to normal. Her own childhood had been stable and loving, making it easy to understand how devastating such loss would be for a young child. Sophia doesn't know about the kidnapping, Dante continued, his voice softer and more personal than she'd heard before. She thinks Patricia is working on an important case and will be home soon. But it's been 4 days, and she's starting to ask questions that become harder to answer every time she calls. Cassidy found herself studying his face as he spoke about his goddaughter, noting the genuine affection and protective concern in his voice. Whatever else Dante Moretti might be, whatever illegal activities his organization might engage in, his love for that little girl was completely authentic. It transformed him from a dangerous criminal into someone fighting to protect a child he considered family. You want me to help extract Judge Hawthorne from a fortified compound controlled by Russian criminals, she said, stating the mission parameters clearly. Using methods that law enforcement can't officially authorize, taking risks that could result in criminal charges if we're caught. He nodded, his dark eyes intense and serious. I want you to help me save a little girl's world by bringing home the only family she has left. Everything else is just tactical details. The simplicity of his explanation cut through all her reservations about legality and proper channels and official authorization. At its core, this was about protecting an innocent child from losing someone she loved. Every other consideration seemed secondary when viewed through that lens. But accepting his offer meant crossing lines she'd never crossed before. It meant operating outside legal boundaries, working with criminal organizations, risking her freedom and reputation for people she'd never met. It meant trusting a man she barely knew with her life and her principles. It also meant using her skills for something that mattered, something beyond corporate security, consulting, and gallery protection. The mission he described would require every aspect of her training, pushing her capabilities to their limits in service of genuinely worthy cause. "I need time to think about this," she said finally, meeting his intense gaze with her own careful evaluation. "I need to understand more about your organization, your methods, and exactly how you plan to approach this extraction." Dante reached into his desk and withdrew a thick folder, placing it on the table between them. "Everything we know about the compound, the guards, the security systems, and the extraction options we've identified. Study it, analyze it. Tell me if you think the mission is feasible with acceptable risk levels." She picked up the folder, feeling the substantial weight of detailed intelligence and tactical planning. "This represents significant resource investment," she observed. "How long have you been planning this operation?" "Since the moment I learned she'd been taken," he replied without hesitation. "Patricia Hawthorne is more than Sophia's guardian. She's the closest thing to family I have left, and I will not lose her to animals who trade in human suffering." As Cassidy stood to leave, Dante moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body and see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I know what I'm asking you to risk," he said quietly. "I know the moral complexity of what I'm proposing. But sometimes protecting innocent people requires us to step outside the boundaries that comfortable people use to feel safe." The elevator ride down felt longer than the ascent, her mind racing through tactical possibilities and ethical implications while the folder seemed to burn in her hands. By the time she reached the parking garage, she'd already begun analyzing the mission parameters and calculating resource requirements. Whatever decision she made about Dante Moretti and his organization, she knew her quiet civilian life had just become infinitely more complicated. The compound materialized out of the San Gabriel Mountains' darkness like a military fortress, floodlights illuminating high concrete walls topped with razor wire, while armed guards patrolled the perimeter with professional precision. Cassidy adjusted her night vision scope, counting sentries and cataloging defensive positions from their concealed observation post on the ridge above the target. 48 hours of mission planning had prepared her for this moment, but seeing the actual tactical challenge brought familiar pre-mission focus flooding through her system. Dante lay beside her in the darkness, his own surveillance equipment tracking guard rotations, while he maintained radio contact with their extraction team positioned at predetermined rally points throughout the mountains. They'd been watching the compound for 6 hours, memorizing patterns and identifying vulnerabilities that intelligence reports had missed. Working with him felt natural in a way that surprised her, their tactical instincts complementing each other as if they'd been partners for years rather than days. "Guard change in 30 seconds, she whispered into her throat mic, watching the northeast tower where 2 sentries prepared to rotate shifts. Standard 15-minute intervals, just like the pattern they'd observed all night. The Russians were professional, but predictable in their adherence to military protocols. "Confirmed," Dante replied, his voice carrying the same controlled tension she felt building in her own system. "Extraction team is standing by, emergency medical is prepped, and we have clean routes to 3 different safe houses depending on Judge Hawthorne's condition." Cassidy had spent the previous day studying every detail of Patricia Hawthorne's background, transforming her from abstract mission objective into a real person whose life hung in the balance. 53 years old, federal judge for 12 years, guardian to Sophia after her sister and brother-in-law died in a car accident. A woman who read bedtime stories and attended school plays, and probably worried about normal things like homework and dentist appointments before Russian criminals destroyed her peaceful world. The thought of 80-year-old Sophia waiting for her guardian to come home had made Cassidy's decision inevitable. Whatever moral boundaries she crossed tonight, whatever legal consequences she might face later, saving that little girl's family took precedence over everything else. Moving to breach position, she whispered, beginning her descent toward the compound's eastern wall where their reconnaissance had identified the weakest point in the security perimeter. Dante would maintain overwatch from the ridge, coordinating extraction and providing sniper support if the mission went wrong. The specialized breaching charge she designed would create a precise hole in the concrete wall without the explosive signature that might alert the entire guard force. 8 years of SEAL training had taught her dozens of ways to enter fortified positions, but this mission required surgical precision rather than overwhelming firepower. "Breach in 10 seconds," she announced, activating the charge and moving to minimum safe distance. The explosion was contained and focused, punching through 18 inches of reinforced concrete with barely more noise than a car backfiring. Within seconds, she was through the wall and moving toward the main building, her night vision revealing exactly what their intelligence had predicted. 2 guards in the courtyard, both facing away from her position, their attention focused on the main gate where they expected any assault to originate. Standard tactical thinking, but wrong against someone with her training and equipment. She moved between shadows like smoke, closing the distance with complete silence. The first guard never knew she was there. Her sleeper hold cut off his oxygen supply in seconds, lowering him unconscious to the ground before moving toward his partner. The second man turned just as her combat knife found the nerve cluster in his neck, dropping him instantly without permanent injury. Both guards secured and restrained within 45 seconds of breaching the perimeter. Inside the main building, heading for target location, she reported, moving through corridors that matched their architectural intelligence perfectly. The Russians had converted a luxury mountain retreat into a temporary prison, but they'd maintained the basic layout that made navigation straightforward for someone who'd memorized the floor plans. Judge Hawthorne's holding room was exactly where their sources had indicated, guarded by a single sentry who never saw her coming. She found Patricia Hawthorne zip-tied to a chair in what had once been an elegant bedroom, her face bruised, but her eyes alert and intelligent. The judge looked exactly like her photographs, silver hair disheveled and business suit wrinkled, but unmistakably alive and coherent. "Judge Hawthorne, I'm here to take you home," Cassidy whispered as she cut the restraints. "Sophia is safe and waiting for you." The older woman's eyes filled with tears at her goddaughter's name, but she remained silent as Cassidy helped her stand and conducted a quick medical assessment. Bruised and exhausted, but mobile, no obvious serious injuries. Perfect for immediate extraction without requiring medical support during movement. "Package secured and mobile," she reported to Dante. "Moving to extraction point Alpha in 90 seconds. The withdrawal went exactly as planned until they reached the courtyard. Motion sensors she hadn't detected triggered perimeter alarms, flooding the compound with harsh light while sirens shrieked through the mountain air. Suddenly, the careful stealth operation became a fighting retreat against a dozen armed professionals who poured from the main building with military precision. "Contact, multiple hostiles, engaging now," she called into her radio while pushing Judge Hawthorne toward the breach point. "Cover fire requests authorization for lethal force." "Authorized." Dante's voice came back immediately. "Light them up." His sniper rifle spoke from the ridge above, precise shots dropping guards who tried to establish firing positions while Cassidy laid down suppressing fire with her assault rifle. Perfect coordination between overwatch and ground assault, each of them covering the other's movements while advancing toward extraction. A Russian gunman appeared between them and the wall breach, his automatic weapon tracking toward Judge Hawthorne with lethal intent. Cassidy's return fire caught him center mass, but not before his wild shots chewed through the concrete inches from where the judge crouched behind inadequate cover. The extraction became a running gunfight through the mountain darkness, Dante providing covering fire, while Cassidy shepherded their rescued package toward the rally point where their vehicles waited. Professional criminals with military training pursuing them through terrain they knew intimately, but neither she nor Dante had survived this long by accepting impossible odds quietly. They reached the extraction vehicles with Judge Hawthorne alive and mobile, though shaken by the violence required for her rescue. The drive down mountain roads in the darkness felt endless, every curve potentially hiding pursuing enemies until they reached the safe house Dante had prepared in a quiet residential neighborhood. Judge Hawthorne collapsed into exhausted sleep immediately after being medically cleared, leaving Cassidy and Dante alone in the safe house kitchen as adrenaline slowly faded from their systems. She found herself studying his face in the dim lighting, noting the way combat stress had revealed glimpses of the man beneath his careful control. "Perfect mission execution," he said quietly, his dark eyes intense as they tracked over her face. "I've worked with professional military contractors who couldn't have managed that extraction with such precision and minimal casualties." She felt something electric building between them, the intimate connection that formed between people who trusted each other with their lives in lethal circumstances. 3 years of civilian relationships had never created this intensity, this sense of finding someone who understood her completely. "You handled Overwatch perfectly," she replied, moving closer without conscious decision. Most crime bosses wouldn't have the tactical discipline to maintain fire control while their partner was in danger. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb stroking gently across her skin while his eyes searched her face. "I told you I'd been waiting for you," he murmured. "Tonight proved I was right to wait." The kiss was inevitable, electric, charged with all the tension that had been building between them since their first meeting. She pressed closer, her fingers sliding into his hair while he pulled her against his chest with controlled strength that spoke of careful restraint despite obvious desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she realized that her civilian life had ended completely. Not just tonight during the mission, but in this moment when she acknowledged that she wanted this man, this dangerous life, this sense of purpose that came from protecting people who needed protection. "I want to accept your offer," she said against his lips, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her system. "Partnership in your organization, permanent position, using my skills for missions that matter." His smile was brilliant, genuine happiness mixed with relief and satisfaction. "Welcome to the team, Cassidy Thorne," he said, sealing the agreement with another kiss that promised everything she'd been missing in her careful civilian existence. Outside the safe house, dawn was breaking over Los Angeles, and somewhere in the city a little girl would soon learn that her guardian was coming home safely. 6 months later, Cassidy stood in the tactical training facility that Dante had constructed in a converted warehouse downtown, watching 4 former military operators practice hostage rescue scenarios under her instruction. The space hummed with purposeful energy as her students worked through complex room clearance drills, their movements becoming more fluid and precise with each repetition. Sunlight streamed through skylights overhead, illuminating equipment that represented the evolution of both her career and her understanding of what meaningful work could accomplish. "Marcus, your entry angle exposes you to crossfire from the stairwell," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned these lessons through 8 years of real-world application. "Remember, speed without precision gets hostages killed. Reset and try again." The former Army Ranger nodded acknowledgement and repositioned his team, absorbing her feedback with the respect that professional operators showed someone whose capabilities they'd witnessed firsthand. Cassidy had built a reputation within their organization as an instructor who could transform competent soldiers into elite rescue specialists, her teaching methods combining technical expertise with hard-earned wisdom about protecting innocent lives under extreme stress. Her engagement ring caught the light as she demonstrated proper breaching techniques, the platinum band and emerald-cut diamond representing 6 months of partnership that had transformed both their professional and personal lives. Dante had proposed 3 weeks ago during a quiet evening at home, presenting the ring along with architectural plans for the house they would build together in the hills overlooking the city. The warehouse door opened to admit Dante himself, his presence immediately drawing her attention despite her focus on the training exercise. He moved through the space with easy familiarity, greeting team members by name and observing the drill progress with obvious satisfaction. 6 months of working together had taught her to read his expressions, and today he carried the subtle tension that indicated new mission requirements. "How are they progressing?" he asked as he reached her position, his voice warm with genuine interest in her work. "The clients are asking specifically for our team based on your reputation for zero-casualty extractions. They'll be ready for deployment within 2 weeks," she replied, noting how naturally the word "our" had become part of their shared vocabulary. The psychological training is as important as the tactical skills when you're dealing with traumatized civilians who don't understand that their rescuers aren't another threat. Their organization had evolved significantly since that first mission to rescue Judge Hawthorne. What began as Dante's criminal enterprise had transformed into a legitimate private security firm specializing in humanitarian protection services. They contracted with federal agencies, international relief organizations, and private families who needed extraction services that traditional law enforcement couldn't provide. The work remained dangerous, but it served purposes that allowed both of them to sleep peacefully at night. Cassidy dismissed the training session and followed Dante to his office, a space that reflected the same evolution as their mission focus. Gone were the subtle criminal undertones she'd noticed during their first meeting, replaced by awards from grateful clients and photographs of successful operations that had saved innocent lives. The change wasn't cosmetic, but fundamental, representing his decision to build something legitimate and lasting rather than merely profitable and dangerous. New mission briefing, he said, opening a file folder on his desk. American aid workers kidnapped in Colombia, being held by a criminal organization that the local authorities can't or won't engage directly. State Department has officially requested our assistance through back channels. She studied the intelligence reports, automatically analyzing terrain, threat assessment, and extraction possibilities while appreciating how completely her life had changed since that evening at the gallery. 6 months ago, she'd been a security consultant protecting art exhibitions. Now she was planning operations to save humanitarian workers from South American criminals, using her skills for missions that created meaningful change in the world. Timeline, she asked, noting the urgency indicators throughout the briefing materials. 72 hours maximum, Dante replied. After that, the kidnappers start executing hostages to pressure the Colombian government into releasing their leadership. The familiar pre-mission focus began building in her system, the combination of tactical challenge and moral urgency that had become her professional motivation. But now it carried additional emotional weight, the security of knowing that someone she loved would be watching her back while she worked to bring innocent people home safely. I'll start mission planning immediately, she said, though her attention was already shifting to equipment requirements and team composition. We'll need aerial reconnaissance, probably a helicopter extraction given the terrain limitations. Dante moved around the desk and pulled her into his arms, his touch gentle despite the controlled strength she'd learned to depend on during dangerous operations. Be careful out there, he murmured against her hair. I know you can handle yourself, but I worry about the woman I love when she's halfway around the world facing people who trade in human suffering. The casual endearment still sent warmth through her system, despite 6 months of hearing it regularly. 3 years of civilian relationships had never created this depth of emotional connection, this sense of being truly known and valued by someone who understood every aspect of her nature. Dante had seen her kill to protect innocent lives and had fallen more deeply in love with her because of it, not despite it. I'll be careful, she promised, meaning it completely. I have too much waiting for me here to take unnecessary risks. They discussed wedding plans extensively over the past 3 weeks, designing a ceremony that would celebrate their partnership while acknowledging the unconventional nature of their shared profession. Judge Hawthorne had agreed to officiate, bringing their relationship full circle to the mission that had brought them together. Sophia would serve as flower girl, the 80-year-old having adopted Cassidy as a beloved aunt who told the most exciting bedtime stories she'd ever heard. The planning process had revealed how completely their lives had merged, from shared tactical preferences to domestic routines that accommodated the demands of their dangerous profession. They'd learned to find comfort in small moments between missions, cooking dinner together while discussing extraction techniques, watching movies while cleaning weapons, falling asleep in each other's arms while knowing they might be called away at any moment to protect people who needed protection. As evening approached, they drove home together to the penthouse apartment they now shared, the space transformed by Cassidy's presence into something warmer and more personal than Dante's previous bachelor existence. She'd added books and plants and photographs that reflected their life together, while he'd expanded his home gym to accommodate her training requirements and installed a secure communications center that allowed them to coordinate operations from anywhere in the world. Dinner conversation covered mission logistics and wedding details with equal enthusiasm, their relationship encompassing every aspect of their shared existence. Cassidy found herself constantly amazed by how natural their partnership felt, how completely her skills and his resources complemented each other in both professional and personal contexts. What did you think of Cassidy's journey from hiding to finding her purpose? I'd love to hear your thoughts about finding work that truly matters to you. Comment below and let me know what drives your own sense of mission. Later that evening, as they reviewed architectural plans for their future home, Cassidy reflected on the path that had brought her from lonely gallery security to this life of shared purpose and genuine love. The house they would build together featured both tactical considerations and domestic comfort, a workspace where she could train other operatives alongside a nursery where they hoped to raise children who would grow up understanding that protecting others was the highest calling anyone could serve. The engagement ring felt comfortable on her finger now, a symbol of commitment that enhanced rather than constrained her independence. She'd found someone who valued her strength rather than trying to diminish it, who encouraged her dangerous work rather than asking her to abandon it for his peace of mind. Dante understood that her need to protect innocent people was fundamental to who she was, just as she understood that his own protective instincts extended far beyond criminal enterprises to encompass everyone he considered family. As they prepared for bed, Cassidy caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the careful professional facade she'd maintained during her civilian consulting career, replaced by someone who looked genuinely happy and completely fulfilled. The former Navy SEAL had found her true calling, not in corporate security or government service, but in partnership with someone who shared her commitment to protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for the Columbia mission, assembling a team and finalizing tactical approaches that would bring American aid workers home safely to their families. Next month, she would marry the man who'd recognized her capabilities from their first meeting and had spent every day since proving worthy of her partnership. Next year, they would break ground on the house where they planned to build a life together, raising children and training operatives and creating something lasting from their shared commitment to protecting innocent lives. The gallery opening that had brought them together felt like someone else's life now, a different woman's story about hiding her true nature behind professional respectability. Cassidy Thorne had stopped hiding the moment she chose to trust Dante Moretti with her heart, and the dangerous, meaningful, absolutely authentic life they'd built together was everything she'd never known she wanted. As she fell asleep in his arms, planning extraction routes and wedding seating arrangements with equal enthusiasm, she realized she'd finally found her true home in the arms of someone who loved her not despite her lethal capabilities, but because of them.